we want to welcome them as well. Thank you.
Carolyn.
Bill. Sopa. Hi. So several teachings recently has been mentioned that the fallacy of feeling that we're separate. And I definitely can cling on there, and I don't know how to let go into the path of totality. Wow.
I think you might actually know better than you think. And I say this from the perspective of there's a difference in path and fruit. And to think that we haven't sort of completely overcome all ignorance and therefore we don't know what to do or how to do it, misses the boat. It misses the boat. It puts us in a frame of mind where we don't actually see what it is that we can do step by step, which is actually where it does unfold. And even if we get to some point where it completely unfolds, that will also be step by step. So giving ourselves credit for what we do and how we do connect, and even if it's just a matter of taking time to reflect on just very simple things about how it is. I like to reflect on stuff that other people built, that I am the beneficiary of, that I am literally supported by the work of. I can easily identify just between me and the ground, sort of easily imagine there are about 12 people, at least, minimum 12 different individuals who have contributed to the situation that I'm resting myself on. And so the more we can appreciate that, then the more we also can appreciate the dimension that it's not sort of just a mechanical thing. All that required their goodwill. And it's remarkable to think of how much goodwill is involved in me just being able to sit at this point in space. And so this is just a kind of an example. This is not some kind of ultimate insight into the nature of phenomena and the inseparability of appearance and mind and all those great things that we could see are actually, we could sort of appreciate them intellectually, because where else do experiences arise other than in our experience, and is our experience connected to our awareness or not? Must be. Otherwise the phrase aware of wouldn't work. It wouldn't mean anything. But we can look more closely at that too, and just gradually come to some kind of, at first some just kind of intellectual appreciation for, my experience. Really, yes, all my experience. I think I'm looking at stuff, but it's my experience. I have an experience of looking at stuff. It's not separate from my awareness. So even just taking those steps, and each of those steps, whether it's in relationship to awareness or it's just in relationship to our sense of connectedness, those unfold gradually. And so if we allow ourselves the circumstances for them to unfold gradually, it goes ahead and unfolds.
A couple things that I use for the same situation of feeling completely separate and in my own personal bubble. Geshe Kelsang Damdul used to say to loosen that a little. Any room you come into, any setting you are in, you just say to yourself quickly, now I'm this. Because how can you be Carolyn if you don't have a place to be? And now you're this, and this, you're everything here. If someone leaves and goes out the door, now you're a little different. You see, because what it is that, at the risk of flattening it into concepts, it's about interdependence. And one concept is dependent origination. So as Bill was saying, I can look at this sabuton, and even in 1 minute I can think, what is this? So there's material, cotton, there's so much in this. Thich Nhat Hanh has some amazing meditations on this, but like he'll take something like this and say, what does it take to make this? And you start thinking, what does it take for it to be here? So I don't know who set it down here. I arrived and I sat on it. Who did that? I don't know. But they're not here in the room. But they did that, and if they hadn't, I couldn't sit on this. So I wouldn't be here. And then going on down. But you can take any object and do quite a contemplative meditation. Like he uses a sheet of paper, Thich Nhat Hanh does. What is in a sheet of paper? Sunlight, rain, trees, loggers, stars, machines that cut it down, corporations, so shareholders, grandparents of shareholders, great-grandparents of shareholders in one piece of paper. So also in our very bodies, you have to have your mother and your father. You have to have that. You have to have the sperm and the egg. You have to have all the food you've eaten. My God, just take one meal and sit and look in your bowl. What did that broccoli go through before it got there? So these are, the kind of meditations we can do to experience our interdependence. And as Bill said, the other factor is this kindness, seeing there is kindness in this. So water in my cup. Somebody had to show up here early and turn it on. Someone had to donate the teapots. All this kindness is constantly coming at us. For me, what it kind of spurs me to practice, because I don't feel, when I get those tiny realizations, I don't feel I can ever repay enough. I've received so much more kindness than I've ever given out. So then it's like, it's just an automatic, because that's our Buddha nature, automatic, I want to give back. So then giving doesn't become a stilted thing, like, do I give $1 to that guy? Maybe he'll drink with it, da-da-da. It just becomes more flowing, because you see you're not separate. So those are some of the kind of thoughts that can help loosen that up. And they can be like that.
I think this can also be very helpful to overcome kind of a cynical attitude about the world, and also a perspective where we take our circumstances for granted. And this very deadly combination where we're taking things for granted and being cynical on top of it. Like, nobody's really done anything for me lately, and now look at them. What a bunch of clowns. Or worse.
Yeah, worse than clowns. There's other words.
Yeah. But and sometimes I contemplate this in terms of, I remember a very stark example for me is remembering this slideshow that my parents gave from their trip to Sarajevo back in the 70s. And if you took pictures of Portland, people bustling around downtown Portland in maybe 1980 or something like that, you sort of kind of shuffled the pictures together. And if you weren't really intimately familiar with either place, you would have a hard time distinguishing kind of, well, it's the same place. But the experience of the people in Sarajevo when their circumstances fell apart to the point where they were suffered terribly during the civil war in Yugoslavia. This kind of circumstance should actually make us take very seriously just how much responsibility we have to carry goodwill. That it's not something to be taken lightly. It's not something that isn't potent. It actually has the power to create a kind of stability in the immediate circumstances that we're a part of. And when we abandon that, it has the power not just to make a little rough patch, but to really turn circumstances upside down. So this is part of contemplating. Don't take things for granted. Don't take it for granted. Marcy?
People need to know why we're doing the microphone is for the streamers, so be sure and talk into it or else it doesn't come across. Yeah.
So all this talk is making me think about like the recent events in Charlottesville and the videos that I've seen of hate groups and the type of violence and bigotry that's being expressed, and it just brings up a lot of questions, as you know, for myself and for everybody else. How do we bring bodhicitta? You know, we're not. If we've taken the bodhicitta vow, we're not supposed to abandon any sentient being. Yeah. And yet, you know, there's a point at which you feel like conflict is unavoidable, perhaps in these situations, and maybe not. But I guess what I'm wondering is, I don't know, I just find it a very trying time to sort of match my Buddhist philosophy, bodhicitta ideals with, like, you know, this impulse to act and to resist. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about that.
Oh, I prefer not to confess my thoughts.
They may not be that helpful. Violating
Maybe I should tell you what I think I should be thinking.
Yeah.
But I won't pretend that I don't have all kinds of thoughts that are, I think, best left unexpressed. But that's one of the reasons that I chose the image of the lotus to start out with, and just chose to pose the challenge in an abstract way to start out with. This notion of what it would be like to be in the midst of a very difficult situation and to carry the inner stability, to carry the inner strength, and to carry that in a way that actually radiated and was magnetizing. I think this is, it's better to think about it from this point of view than to try to go into the details of the situation and work backwards. Because once we go into the details of the situation, the only details that are available to us are actually the stories that we're telling ourselves about the situation. And we have embedded in that all the positive and negative habits that we carry. So it's hard to tease it apart. It's important to tease it apart, and it's important to look in the details. But if we can't also step back and hold a broader view than what's happening this week, a broader view than what's happening this year, a broader view than what's happening right wherever we happen to be. Without that, we don't have the ability then to generate that strength of being, because we'll be so caught in the details of, well, if this, we're going to put ourselves into the hypothetical situation. And again, I don't want to confess the things that I've seen myself do in hypothetical situations that I've just put myself through in the last 2 weeks. I'll just confess that they've arisen. I think one of the things that's difficult is that we have a very hard time imagining how to be in highly energetic situations. I'll use that term rather than other kinds of terms, but situations that are highly energetic, even just in the physical world, are very unstable. You have a lot of heat, you have a lot of kindling, and you have a lot of oxygen. It doesn't take much for the circumstance to go from kindling, oxygen, and heat to a conflagration. Things are very unstable. So part of our challenge is that since we actually do want to just be left alone, that's part of our impulse, just to be kind of not bothered by things, have kind of a peaceful, easy, comfortable life. And so we learn how to operate in that realm. And part of that is learning how to not rock the boat. Some of it's skillful and some of it's just Thomas Merton used the term something that a bargain of egoisms. So I won't act too aggressively, and then you won't act too aggressively, and then as long as I'll say this and you'll say that, we'll get along. When we get out of a comfort realm, a comfort range, we have basically kind of my model is there's a certain point, we get up to a certain point, and then beyond that, we call 911. We call the fire department in our minds, and we respond with whatever patterns we've developed to respond to extreme situations. So we go from being kind of a happy-go-lucky Bill to this screaming maniac. Kind of so like 0 to 60 in a microsecond of an outburst of rage and outburst of physical activity, whatever kind. So it's actually important to consider something, what it would be like to actually be a bodhisattva in the midst of very extreme circumstances. And that's part of the reason to reflect on you could say, the message of the lotus that arises in, I'll use the word, I don't use it often, but it rises just out of shit. But it's not stained by that. It's not controlled by the circumstance. And we need to just look really, really carefully. How would it be? What might we do, even if we had to act in what, from the external point of view, would look like a conflictual way, how would we maintain the vision inside? How would we act energetically but still maintain the core of unwavering bodhicitta? It wouldn't necessarily look like it would look. I guarantee it won't look like it would look if we were sort of back kind of at our comfy tea party etiquette, where we say, please pass the sugar and thank you very much, and how was your day today? Just to fill time. So it's a challenge. And I don't think that we can, we also can't get caught in the path and fruit business. We can't not do something just because we're not experiencing the fruit yet. But we should also, when we do something, also not pretend it's perfect. So we have to have a great deal of humility and honesty about the limitations of our ability to act in these situations. And we have that humility, we may restrain ourselves from the 911 call to the wrong fire department. So those are just some of my thoughts, but it's very challenging, yeah. You can see, if you go different places, we don't have the experience in our country of seeing the fruit of very serious conflict, armed conflict. We had a civil war, but that's the evidence of that is kind of erased physically. Not in other ways. Clearly not in other ways. But looking, Bruce and I were talking about visiting Budapest. And in Budapest, you can still, after all these years, you can still see the havoc caused by just people with just guns, shooting at buildings and just tearing up. And you think that all those shots they weren't aimed at buildings per se, they were aimed at people. They were designed to tear up people. But that kind of evidence, it's there. So we live in a bubble, really. And this is one of the reasons to reflect on the realms of existence. We live in the God realm. We'd like to say, oh, no, not me. I don't have all that advantage, but there are so many ways in which we really do. We have the same kind of advantages and comfort and convenience of long life, relative freedom from illness, relative freedom from conflict. So really reflecting on this, it's a very rare circumstance. And what are we going to do with the circumstance that we're in? Will we use it to cultivate, as I sometimes do, cultivate the ability to think of even more clever insults for people that we don't respect? Or will I use it to actually look deeper into what's possible? Could it be possible for me to develop a greater ability to be in very challenging situations and act skillfully, think skillfully, speak skillfully? So, in short, I don't have the answer.
Well, there is no answer, no one answer, but effective action can be done. And as Bill said, it comes from, first, the view. So the view, whatever view we take, needs to be in consort with reality. That reality of we're all interdependent. There's really no us and them. As soon as we buy, there's us and them. Whatever we do, that action will increase the suffering. And it's really hard to get that first step down. Us and them, us and them. So some of the things I do Well, I ran a lot of experiments. That's the other phrase I'm using from Bill, run the experiment. In my young days, I ran a lot of experiments as a leftist, a socialist, a protester, a lawyer defending protesters, ran a lot of experiments, and I learned a lot off of that. And I think the main thing I learned, I mean, I'm talking 25 years of that. The main thing I learned is I didn't have a broad enough view. You know, did a lot of good with a whole lot of people, but because the view was exclusive, you know, them, us, we're right, they're wrong, then nothing ends from that view. So the thing I do is I just run the experiment that Lama Michael constantly puts before us, which is consider that every single being, I mean, do a stop frame on one of those videos where, you know, the Nazi guy takes the first punch. That's one I've been looking at, a protester standing there yelling, though. And the Nazi steps out of the parade and punches him. And then a whole fracas occurs. Everybody's punching everyone. And just to sit there and go, every single one of these beings is suffering. And everyone, this is our view as Buddhists, every one of them is connected with me. And the Nazi guy is not less connected than the protester I agree with. There's no less or more connection. And then you go through those 7 steps of raising bodhicitta. They've all been my mother. Well, that doesn't work for me. So I can say they all have been my little brother who I care about. They've all been kind to me somewhere in the past. So you have to open it up. I mean, it's not going to work if we're just going to say this life. Just not going to work. And you don't have to say, oh, scientifically, I completely believe in future and past life. No, we're just doing this because it works. What does it work to do? It works to change my mind and heart. That's my workshop. It just works to imagine this. So imagine both of these people are my kind brothers, sisters. They've been very kind to me in the past. I want to repay that kindness. Then how can I do that, you know? If I start from there, whatever I do is going to be really different. And as Bill says, it doesn't mean what I do then is go sit down and have tea by myself and do nothing. It might be I decide to, well, I usually decide to do some prayers at least, you know. May every single one of you, all of you, be well and happy. May you have everything you need. May you find a spiritual path. And then you can decide. I mean, there are groups doing effective stuff. You have to find them. I don't think it's very effective to go out and punch people. It's not very effective to break bank windows, which some people might have done, or, you know, I mean, which I witnessed. And or there's a lot of things we did that were not so effective. We ran a lot of experiments, as I said. So the view is the work to start with. Then what you do, gather with people who are doing things that you feel are effective. So then my next step is, who's been effective in the world? I mean, where their legacy is still around. So Martin Luther King, who was based on Gandhi, who was based on ahimsa, no harm. Whatever you do, don't harm. The Dalai Lama, you know, Nelson Mandela, 23 years in prison, tortured there, belittled on this crappy island off of South Africa, and stepped out and said, the one thing I don't want is any revenge, none. Became the president, helped establish the reconciliation, where people who had killed, like some guy who had killed your son, sat down with you And, you know, with Bishop Tutu, you talked, and you talked until you could forgive. This is what a real hero is. That not, you know, going out and protesting. And protests are fine if they don't become violent, but we have to look at the effects. Run the experiment, look at the effects. One of the experiments we ran, we saw if we, like the Vietnam War protests, if we crossed a certain line, the rest of the culture labeled us and hated us. So then we didn't get anyone joining in. It was like, oh. But if you use ahimsa, the no harm, and you go out quite firm in your message, people can see that dignity, that compassion, that caring, and can join, you know. So it's complex, but there's a few of those kind of things that we can learn from who has engaged in effective action, and it still resonates throughout the world. Sometimes I say to myself, what would Martin Luther King be saying? And, you know, I mean, he was strong, man. He marched across that bridge, you know. And, I mean, in the face of people who had murdered others and gotten away with it. And he did get killed, so did Gandhi. You know, that's a bit scary. That's a bit scary. But they were ready for that. They were like, if you take that view and you take it on, you have to have that bigger idea of what you're doing. You don't want to lose the war for some battle, you know, the battle in Charlottesville or the battle in Orlando or the battle here and there. You don't want to lose the whole thing for this tight time. And I'm with Bill. I think, yeah, we're in a bit of a bubble, especially white middle class people. People of color have not lived in that same bubble in this country. But our bubble is shredding a little, and maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe we join the world. Maybe we open our hearts to how it's been everywhere. So I don't see it as necessarily a terrible thing at all. This is the sign appearance of the guru, we call it. The teacher showing up and saying, hello, wake up, you've been in your bubble. Now, a little more, we gotta bring some more energy to it. But what kind? The energy, what do they call it? The militia of compassion. It's in the 37 practices of a bodhisattva. May I be in the militia of compassion. And we can do it. We can do this. We'll all do it in a different way. Someone will sign petitions, someone will go out on the street, someone will talk to a white supremacist, which I've done before, and was really surprised how scared that guy was. That's all I saw was his fear. And we were able to talk. And it was like, man, that guy is so scared of the whole world. That's some suffering. And then acting straight out of that, you know. So there are things we can do. We can do this. We can meet this. But the view has to click in, and we will lose it. I mean, I'm with Bill. You know, there's plenty of swearing at the screen these days. But then coming back, okay, that's really not going to help. I'm putting the same thing in the world that I don't like. Yeah. Do I want to add more of that? There's plenty of that around. Plenty of anger. Plenty of screaming at each other. We got enough of that. So those are some ideas. But we can do this because we have Buddha nature. My teacher, anytime we used to tell her, we can't do that. We can't stay up this late. We can't, at the monastery, we can't do this. And she'd say, oh, this is what my teacher said. If you can become a Buddha, you can do this. It's just look at her like, oh, it's hopeless. We're going to have to become Buddhists.
It'll be easier than staying up late.
Yeah, it'll be easier staying up late pouring concrete for a foundation. You can can become a Buddha. You can do this.
Along these lines, I was thinking this morning, I think probably for decades, those of us who are old enough to have memories that go back decades, we've heard something along the lines, if you're not angry, you're not paying attention.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought about this morning, and I thought, this doesn't set well with me anymore. It's very manipulative. It's you must sink to my level, or you're not really discerning what the situation is. And I thought maybe a similar but far more effective slogan might be something along the lines that if your energy level has not been raised, you're not discerning.
Yeah. I was thinking if you're not feeling compassion, you're not paying close enough attention.
That would be another one.
Yeah.
But I just want to bring it up because it is so it's such a common kind of syllogism, as though this is really true, and you can hear people say that, and then you can watch a whole room of people go.
Yeah.
And that's kind of scary, really, when it gets down to it. So I think figuring out how that we can actually participate in the larger discussions in society, where we can actually manifest kind of a higher level of energy and engagement without being drawn into that model of self-righteous anger. So.
It's really good to spend time thinking of your heroes or sheroes. And one I have is a quick story. Palestinian woman was interviewed in the Middle East in the middle of, after a campaign had been run against her town by Israel, and things were bombed out and all kinds of, it just looked like a war zone. And a reporter went up to her and said, "How long you been living here?" She said, "All my life." And he said, "Wow, you've been in 40 years of war. How have you dealt with this?" And she just looked at him and said, "In my heart, I've never gone to war against anyone." In the middle of war, this is the model. This is the model. And we need to bring that in the middle, as Bill says, of that energy exploding. In my heart, I'm not going to war against anyone. That's the whole Gandhi thing, which is the Buddhist thing. Yeah, there's a question back there.
Sure.
Well, I just want to say thank you both. So many thoughts that everybody has said, but that just made me think really quickly about, I had some friends that were affected by the Oklahoma City bombing, and I remember a African-American woman who had lost 2 grandchildren at the daycare, and she was speaking, and she said this wonderful thing. They were saying, "Oh, this is so hard, what are we going to do?" And she just said, the hardest thing for me to do and for all of us to do is to keep loving.
Yes.
To keep loving. It's easy to go out and hate. And I don't think anyone heard her, but I never forgot it. It's just really wonderful. And then the other thing, thinking about your metaphor, your wonderful metaphors, I realized I have an evangelical cousin, very evangelical, married to an evangelical man, whom I love them dearly. She's like a sister. So she's my little experiment, my little workshop, because it takes so much, I realize how much skill it takes to maneuver around conversations with her. Yeah. And she's kind of exploring too, and I do see that as all these years of going along, she'll kind of put things out. Like, she's always been very racist, but every now and then she'll put out something like, "Oh, I'm volunteering now here, and I met an African-American man," and so she's trying in her own way. And as long as I don't take the bait and get into a big discussion about, like, "Well, you've hated," and I go, "Oh, well, that," just kind of normalize it. And I just realized the energy, you're talking about the energy that rises up, it's there, but because I love this person, I have to do it with a great deal of what I realize now is skill. So if I could just transfer some of that into my people that I don't care about, if I could feel that way, like everyone, has a cousin like her, or has a sister, or has a mother, or has had someone they love. If I could just see them as her, then it would. But it takes a lot of work, though. So anyway, that's all.
Yeah, it takes work and it takes patience. Miriam.
I just wanted to mention that I've been contemplating, so I feel very much like I'm in the God realm too. And I know that a great deal of that is because it was built on the backs of many African Americans and other people of color. And I keep thinking, what reparations can I make? Is that Buddhist? We don't really have enough time to really talk about it in detail, but I just wanted to put out there that's something that I'm thinking about and asking, like, how can I do this properly? Thank you.
Well, I think one thing I would say is having a profound appreciation for not just the human beings, but all beings that have sacrificed themselves for us to be in the situation that we are, to step wider to start out with, and realize that it's the model of reparation has one small flaw in it, which is that it's as though we might be able to pay something off. Mm-hmm. And it's not really possible. That doesn't mean that we don't have our obligation to do something, but we can't. Nostalgia, I heard once defined as, or I forgot what it was, nostalgia for a history that we wish we'd had.
That isn't going to happen.
And so we can't go back and undo that. So then it's more a matter of how do we add the ingredients into the mix now that take the circumstances that have arisen and use those as the seed for the most profound thing possible that we can imagine. So exactly how we do that and how we bring that energy to allow it to unfold, particularly where we can identify particular kinds of knots that have been tied up and pulled tight and constrict things. How do we help those dissolve? It's not a simple question, but I think it's. I like to step out of the kind of the notion that the reparation, because I get in my mind somehow that, well, after I get done putting on a good enough show, whatever good enough happens to be, then I can just relax again. Then I can go back to normal.
Yeah.
But it's not that easy. And I think remembering to keep loving is not a bad place to hold all that. Well, thank you again for sitting with me. Thank you for challenging me to look at my own mind, my own stream of thoughts and reactions. So let's dedicate this that we might carry some of this spirit of inquiry and love into our lives and let it fill space. By this virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state.
Thank you.